Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Eddington. How are you both? Asked DCI Hunter. Relieved now the trial is over, Chief Inspector, replied my wife Diane. We were shown into a meeting room by the DCI. A woman was sitting at the table. Stella Brightman is our Witness Protection Liaison Officer, explained the DCI. She is now responsible for you two, and I'll leave you in her capable hands. I will no longer be in contact with you, so I wish all the best in your new lives. I know you are making sacrifices, but we are very grateful for your help. I smiled at the reference to sacrifice. For me, it was the start of an exciting new adventure. First of all, I wish to confirm the agreed plan for your protection, Mr. Eddington. It is rather unusual to say the least, but I think it's wonderful, remarked Stella. Mr. Eddington, I understand you wish to change gender and continue to live with Mrs. Eddington as a couple? Diane and I had discussed during the trial what we should do afterwards. She said that being a key witness was the right thing to do and she would stand by me, even though it meant our lives would change dramatically and she would also have to leave her job. We are truly happily married. I am a crossdresser, and when I get home after work I change into one of my traditional housewife dresses and prepare our evening meal. At weekends we share the household chores and go out as two women for shopping and leisure. To decide to live as a woman with a new identity was an easy step to take. Diane would be the head of the household and breadwinner, and I would be a full-time housewife. The flaw with the plan was that although I passed well as a woman, I would not stand up to close scrutiny. If I was outed as a man, then there was a risk that my cover could be blown. It was Diane who suggested I should transition to a woman. She said she would love me just as much, and making love as two women would be no less gratifying than now. Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Eddington. How are you both? Asked DCI Hunter. Relieved now the trial is over, Chief Inspector, replied my wife Diane. We were shown into a meeting room by the DCI. A woman was sitting at the table. Stella Brightman is our Witness Protection Liaison Officer, explained the DCI. She is now responsible for you two, and I'll leave you in her capable hands. I will no longer be in contact with you, so I wish all the best in your new lives. I know you are making sacrifices, but we are very grateful for your help. I smiled at the reference to sacrifice. For me, it was the start of an exciting new adventure. First of all, I wish to confirm the agreed plan for your protection, Mr. Eddington. It is rather unusual to say the least, but I think it's wonderful, remarked Stella. Mr. Eddington, I understand you wish to change gender and continue to live with Mrs. Eddington as a couple? Diane and I had discussed during the trial what we should do afterwards. She said that being a key witness was the right thing to do and she would stand by me, even though it meant our lives would change dramatically and she would also have to leave her job. We are truly happily married. I am a crossdresser, and when I get home after work I change into one of my traditional housewife dresses and prepare our evening meal. At weekends we share the household chores and go out as two women for shopping and leisure. To decide to live as a woman with a new identity was an easy step to take. Diane would be the head of the household and breadwinner, and I would be a full-time housewife. The flaw with the plan was that although I passed well as a woman, I would not stand up to close scrutiny. If I was outed as a man, then there was a risk that my cover could be blown. It was Diane who suggested I should transition to a woman. She said she would love me just as much, and making love as two women would be no less gratifying than now. She enjoyed my role playing as a housewife and having a part-time girlfriend. I was reluctant at first. I wasn't transgender, there was no woman trapped inside the body of a man, but I was a perfectionist, and when dressing I often wished I had Diane's shapely and feminine body. I quickly overcame my male prejudices and accepted the idea with enthusiasm. Yes, that is correct, I confirmed as I gripped my wife's hand. As I've had to give up my job and my normal life, I thought I would take the opportunity to live as a woman full-time, and what better way for me as a witness to a major crime to disappear? And as a housewife I can keep a low profile, no need to officially exist as if it were. You are right there, so many of our clients want to retain too much of their old life and they put themselves in danger. Forgive me if I'm jumping to the wrong conclusion. I understand you are straight and happily married. So why do you want to go as far as having reassignment surgery? Yes, I'm straight and Diane is the only one for me. We believe we can have a loving relationship as two lesbians, I made finger quotes, and I would have one less secret to keep. And I don't want Diane having to spend the rest of her life as my carer or a widow if the gang's associates track me down because of a slip-up. My employer, recognizing my sacrifice, has agreed to continue my salary for the year and then a generous pension thereafter. Stella was quiet for a moment as if taking in what I just said. I didn't know that. You must be highly thought of. Well, they knew I could no longer work in my field. Besides, the company was a victim of the crime. The money they were losing is far in excess of my salary. That's wonderful news. It looks like you have nothing to worry about for your future, said Stella. We have arranged with one of our service providers to prepare you for life under the witness protection scheme. As you know, we'll be in isolation for a year at a remote secret facility. It is secure in that no unauthorized entry or communication is permitted. However, it is not a prison. You can leave at any time, but if you do so, you will also leave the witness program. During this time, Derek will disappear. We will give the impression that you were disposed of by the defendant's associates in revenge for your testimony. A new identity will be created for when you leave the facility. During this time, you will transition and receive training to be a woman and a housewife. You can then move back in with Diane, but as her wife in a same-sex marriage. You seem to have everything well organized. Are the arrangements in place for Diane? I asked. As you know, Diane will also enter the witness protection scheme today, replied Stella. We have arranged a safe house in another part of the country. She can stay there while she makes arrangements for your future. I will support her. Our people are currently at your existing home packing up your belongings to go into storage or with Diane to the safe house. So we can never return home? Asked Diane. It is no longer safe for either of you. If you agree, I will put the house up for sale, and I strongly advise you to do so immediately. I will then assist you to search for a new property. Derek, I'm afraid you cannot be involved while you are at the facility. You will just have to trust me, dear. Diane smirked. There was a knock on the door. Come in, replied Stella. We are ready for Mr. Eddington, announced a young woman. Sir, please come with me. I looked at Diane and then Stella. I'm sorry, there is no time for you to say goodbye to your wife. You will see her again. Please give her your wallet and phone and anything else that may identify you. I emptied my pockets. And your wedding ring. I looked at her and saw that she was serious. My escort took my arm and led me to the door. I looked back at my wife and mouthed, I love you. She was expressionless and silent as the door closed behind me. I had mixed emotions. We didn't say goodbye properly, and it would be a year before we were together again, yet I was about to begin an exciting new life. I was escorted through to an adjoining building where an unmarked police car was waiting. After about 3 hours, we turned off the highway onto a private drive leading to a majestic Gothic Victorian country house. As we pulled up at the entrance, a formidable-looking woman came out and spoke to my escort, who then left. She then turned to me, smiled and said, I'm Dr. Barrington, welcome to Ladywood House, please come with me. We entered the house entrance hall and ascended a grand staircase up to the attic floor. These were the original servants' dormitories. We now use them for our girls. You will be pleased to know that instead of 4 maids to a room as originally, you will be sharing with just one other girl. This is your bed and furniture. You will have the convenience of a modern bathroom which you will share with the other girls on this floor. I started to speak. This is not what I expected, but she shushed me with a wave. You will not speak to me or any of my staff unless asked a question. This really wasn't what I was expecting, but early days yet. You will find some clothes in the wardrobe. In the morning, put on your uniform and report to my office at 7 a.m. sharp. In the meantime, you are not to leave this floor. She turned and left the room. I looked in the wardrobe, excited to see what I would be wearing. You can imagine my disappointment when I saw a plain light gray cotton shift dress with short sleeves hanging there alongside a white cotton nightdress. In a drawer, I found a pair of cotton knickers and nothing else, not even a bra. On the floor of the wardrobe were a pair of white shoes just as plain as the dress. A minimal domestic uniform, hardly the makings of the housewife I was going to be. I sat on my bed. It was a narrow iron-framed single bed. There were 2 sheets, a blanket and a pillowcase folded in our pile on a thin mattress along with a single pillow. Very basic. I was a key prosecution witness this morning. Now I feel like the one who ended up in a cell. The door opened and in walked a middle-aged woman wearing the same dress, well I say woman, but clearly a man despite the signs of swelling breasts. I wondered if she was the girl I'm sharing with. "Hello," she said, "just arrived?" "Yes," I replied. She came over and hugged me. "I thought so. Easy, really. You are in this room and still dressed as a man. We girls, that is what they call us, have to look after each other. So my first advice is get out of those clothes now and put on either your uniform or your nightdress. You must never leave this floor without wearing your uniform. I suggest you wear your nightdress as it will be lights out soon. By the way, I'm Emily, but only between us girls, otherwise I'm Gifford. You can tell me your name tomorrow." That's odd, I thought. I took off my clothes, it was the last time I saw them, and pulled on the nightdress. I was thinking this is definitely not what I was expecting. Perhaps tomorrow morning after my meeting with Dr. Barrington everything will become clearer. Emily told me to listen out for the chimes of the grandfather clock in the entrance hall. She had also told me that Dr. Barrington's office was off the entrance hall. And don't forget, be punctual, don't go in until told and don't speak unless asked a question. Call Dr. Barrington madam and refer to her as the director, never by her name, added Emily. So I was standing in my very unflattering uniform outside the director's office precisely at 7 a.m. and as the clock struck I knocked on the door. "Enter," came the response. So I did. There was a small office with a not unattractive woman sitting at a desk. "I'll let the director know you are here. Please wait." I was soon ushered into the director's study. "This is Mrs. Slocum," said the director. "She is the housekeeper and will be responsible for your duties and training. No pleasantries. Your name will be Gibbings. I and my staff will be responsible for your feminization. Before you go with Mrs. Slocum you may ask me a question." I plucked up the courage. "Thank you, madam. I understood I was to be trained to be a housewife." "I don't know about that. This is a maid school and all our girls undertake foundation training in domestic service. After a year, a girl would either return to their sponsor as a maid or become a senior girl for a further year and be assigned a role and additional training in accordance with instructions from the sponsor. Throughout your stay you will carry out domestic duties assigned by Mrs. Slocum as a contribution to your keep. You are dismissed. Wait in the outer office for Mrs. Slocum." I did what I was told. "Follow me, Gibbings," said Mrs. Slocum as she came out of the director's study. I followed her to the east wing and into a large kitchen with a high ceiling. It must have been the original kitchen as it was a mix of traditional and modern. There were a number of girls dressed in the same uniform as me, but with kitchen aprons and caps, and some dressed as cooks. We went into a side office where an attractive statuesque woman, dressed as a chef, stood up to acknowledge Mrs. Slocum. "This is Miss Trudeau, you will call her cook." She turned to cook. "This is Gibbings. She arrived yesterday evening for foundation training. I'll leave her in your hands to train as a kitchen maid." "Yes, Mrs. Slocum. Leave her to me." The housekeeper left. "Now, Gibbings, you will spend 6 months with me in the kitchen when I hope you will become proficient as a kitchen maid. If you show promise you may later undertake training as a cook or as necessary to fulfill your assigned role during your 2nd year. You will be taught old traditional tasks and skills as well as those for a modern kitchen. Your first role at Ladywood House will be as a scullery maid. You've met Gifford. She will work with you until you are able to carry on your own. If you are obedient, diligent and respectful I can be your friend. I first came to Ladywood House as one of the girls and later was taken on as a cook and now I'm the head chef or rather cook. I'll help you, but if you are lazy or cross me then I can be your worst enemy. I'm no longer one of the girls, I'm senior staff." She paused and yelled, "Gifford!" Emily came running. That evening after an exhausting but satisfying shift, I asked Emily why the staff were so strict. They aren't. They are caring and want to bring the best out of us. But the rules are there to condition us to be the maids that our masters and mistresses and betters expect, and that includes not being seen or heard and knowing our place, like in Victorian times. I had butterflies in my tummy hearing Emily's explanation. I'm not sure why. Ladywood House was not open to the public or held any events. There were occasional guests of senior staff, otherwise there were just staff and girls. The kitchen provided the catering for all, otherwise the function of the kitchen was to train us foundation girls and senior girls needing more advanced or specialist skills. We supplied 3 meals a day served in the senior staff and maids' dining rooms. Each dining room also had facilities for refreshments and meals for those whose duties clashed with meal times. At first I wanted to leave, but I knew I had to see it through. So although it is not what I expected, I persevered. We were a busy kitchen and I had plenty of opportunities. I tried to seek out tasks that I thought would be suitable for my future as a housewife and for entertaining. Cook was particularly understanding, taking time to tutor me and the other girls while feeding everyone. We were a maid school after all, not a great house. I particularly enjoyed baking and preparing pasties. I did progress to assistant cook. I had gained an essential skill to be a perfect housewife to my Diane. I worked 8-hour shifts, as did all the girls. At all hours depending on my duties. I then spent 4 hours a day learning to become a woman. My time off was spent with the other girls on my floor. We all became very close, but we never talked about our lives outside Ladywood House, future and past. To the girls I became Alice. It was my femme name from my crossdressing days. 6 months later and now I had to start again as a housemaid, first as a junior maid then taking turns as a laundry maid, chambermaid and parlor maid. In another 6 months I could add housekeeping to my skill set. As a kitchen maid my uniform was functional. The concession to femininity was that the basic garment was a dress. But in housekeeping, maids could be seen by household members and guests or serve them directly. In Ladywood House, the senior girls and staff represented the household. As a junior maid my main task was cleaning and I was not supposed to be seen, but there was always a risk of a chance encounter. So my uniform was smarter and prettier. I wore a black cotton dress, knee-length with short sleeves, a lace-trimmed apron that tied with a bow behind the back, and Mrs. Slocum insisted on a neat bow, and a lace-trimmed cap with 2 short ribbons. I wore black opaque tights with black low-heeled shoes. I was looking more feminine and presentable. The director was giving me a routine medical checkup. I was undertaking hormone therapy. "You are a very healthy woman, Gibbings," she said. Seeing me naked with a body that was a cross between a man and a woman, referring to me as a girl didn't seem apartment. "Your breasts are developing nicely, no need for enhancement. You are going to be proud that they are all you. You are ready for your first bra, go and see Mrs. Slocum when we are finished." Well, of course, it wasn't my first bra. I had been a crossdresser after all and my bras were in storage, but I felt as proud as a young girl seeing my own breasts nestling in the cups of my bra. And my status will improve as I would become one of the bra-wearing foundation girls. That night, after my deportment lessons, when I joined the girls on my floor there were squeals of delight. Although I had changed into my nightdress I had kept my bra on. My last stint in housekeeping was as a parlor maid. I now came into regular contact with senior staff. Ladywood House did not have a family in residence so the senior staff took on their role, so we had someone to serve. As a parlor maid I also served in the senior staff dining room. We had 2 uniforms, a black knee-length dress for daytime and a shorter flared purple dress for evening worn with a lace petticoat. The evening uniform flattered me and was low cut. Not all the girls could show cleavage, but I was now a buxom woman. My feminization was near completion and I was very presentable. When I was being fitted for my evening uniform, other uniforms were just drawn from the store. I couldn't believe that the woman I saw in the mirror was me. The dress was so flattering. I had truly left my cross-dressing days behind. I fell in love with parlor maids' dresses, so much more feminine than the 60s housewife dresses I had favored. The evening uniform was fun, for both the wearer and the senior staff, with so much lace. I now also wore high heels, 3-inch for daytime, 4-inch for evening. I had missed wearing heels, and sheer black tights. I was no longer disappointed I was a maid, far from it. It is now all I wanted to be. I was standing in the director's study. She was seated at her desk. Mrs. Slocum and cook were either side of her. "Gibbings," said the director, "you have now completed your foundation training. When you leave us in a year's time you are to be a maid-of-all-work and domestic service to your mistress and her companion. You will have a female identity and will live as a woman. To prepare you for this future role you will now become one of our senior girls and be trained in additional skills, such as being a lady's maid, and complete your feminization program. When I consider you are ready and presentable you will become the personal maid to a senior staff member until your contract ends. You are dismissed. Please wait in my outer office for me. And Gibbons, I don't usually comment on individual girls, but I'm going to make an exception in your case. You have become an accomplished domestic servant. You carry out your duties diligently and with skill and you are deferential to your betters. You have become the epitome of a traditional maid servant." She looked away. I wanted to thank her but I knew I wasn't allowed to speak. I curtsied, turned and left. "Come with me," said the director as she came out of her study. We walked through to another building. It was modern and housed the medical center and clinic. We entered a private examination room. "Get undressed, Gibbons, everything." I did as I was told and stood there naked. "You are ready to complete your transition." As she was examining me I was admiring myself in the mirror. I was slimmer than a year ago, my chores and exercises kept me trim and fit and our diet was designed to encourage us foundation girls to lose weight. The hormone therapy had been a great success and my breasts and hips had developed nicely. My skin and face, now permanently hairless, was soft and mainly blemish-free. My hair had grown out and I was now sporting a bob style well on the way to be shoulder length. I wasn't the lithe young maid as portrayed in television dramas, but I considered myself a fit woman. I had also undergone psychological changes, perhaps it was the experience of living amongst the foundation girls for a year, or it was the hormones, or being treated as a maid, probably all three, but I had accepted my destiny and I was looking forward to joining Diane and living a full life as woman and her wife. Although I now wanted to be her maid and not a housewife. The director stirred me from my musing as she prepared me to take a sample of my blood. "If the test results are okay, we can schedule you for surgery tomorrow. You will stay in the center until you have recovered. In addition to completing your transition to a woman I will carry out some cosmetic surgery to feminize your face and voice. Do you have any questions?" I was dumbfounded and just shook my head. "Hello, Alice. How do you feel?" That was the first time the director had called me Alice. I didn't even realize she knew my name. I was only Alice to the foundation girls. "I'm going to give you a final checkup and if okay you can take up your new position straight away." She carried out a thorough examination and pronounced me sufficiently recovered. "Put on your dressing gown and come with me." We went back to the mansion house and up to the first floor. It was below the attic floor where my old room was. She opened a door and we entered what I knew was her apartment and went through to the kitchen. "Please sit down, Gibbons." I sat at her kitchen table. "I'm going to make myself a cup of tea, would you like one?" "I'll make the tea, madam." It didn't seem right that she should serve me. "Next time, Gibbons. When you are familiar with my kitchen." She made a pot of tea and placed 2 mugs on the table. Funny, I thought she would have used cups and saucers, but then I'm only a maid. As she poured the tea she announced, "You are going to be my personal maid, my lady's maid. You will have your own room in this apartment. You will now address me as my lady." Wow. I thought. "Thank you, my lady. I will do my best." "I know you will. There is something I would like you to be aware of. It is not generally known but Mrs. Slocum and myself are the only persons on this site born female. Only she and I know this as a fact. Now you make 3. Everyone else was born male, including the rest of the staff. The staff are either senior girls like you learning additional skills or girls who have completed their training and decided to stay on. Just like the foundation girls, they are of all types, from crossdressers through to those who decided to become women. We are a self-contained community. It was getting close to the end of my 2 years at Ladywood House. My time as Dr. Barrington's lady's maid had been the best time of my life. I hadn't realized that being a woman and serving another could be so satisfying. I was the most senior maid and would have been second to Mrs. Slocum if I was on the permanent staff. And I was addressed as Miss, though my friends still called me Emily in private. But I was still one of the girls, having not long been a foundation girl myself, but I had access to senior staff facilities. Of course, the rules still applied. I was still a maid in training. I had to curtsy to my betters. I loved doing that, and I could not speak unless spoken to. But I was treated with mutual respect as I was the director's lady's maid. In my new position I had a wider range of uniforms. I had to wear a uniform at all times. I had evening and day uniforms and a particularly racy one for social occasions, that is to serve at such functions not fancy dress. I wore a cap, usually with long ribbons, and an apron. But as I was now the senior maid, my uniforms were better quality, usually of satin and oodles of lace. And so were my lingerie and night dresses. And I could wear petticoats. And high heels were compulsory, unless impractical. I loved my uniforms. As Dr. Barrington's lady's maid, I helped her bathe, dress and looked after her clothes. I accompanied her when she left Ladywood House. I was always in the background, as a good maid should be, ready to serve my lady. But I didn't look like a maid on those occasions. I dressed and was introduced as her personal assistant and sometimes a dear friend. I had mainly business suits, dresses and skirts of course, but I also wore casual clothes as well as evening and cocktail dresses for more informal occasions. I even accompanied her on holiday when I wore my first bikini. Dr. Barrington insisted I wear it. I felt uncomfortable lying next to her at the poolside. Such skimpy garments are not what a maid should be wearing. But deep inside my female side loved the admiring glances and my cross-dressing male side was proud of my look. I loved my civilian wardrobe nearly as much as my maid wardrobe. I had just served Dr. Barrington a late supper when she asked me to sit with her. Alice, when alone she called me Alice contrary to tradition, but then she wasn't actually the lady of the house, she was the director of the maid's school and clinic and a modern woman. I have some news for you. Your stay with us will end next week. A car has been arranged. As a sign of my appreciation of the service you have given me, you may take all your clothes and uniforms with you. I have also prepared a reference in case you are let go by your sponsor. But if you are, please contact me first. You are always welcome here. Feel free to speak your mind. I don't know what to say, but thank you, my lady. I really do appreciate everything you have done for me. I came here to find a new identity, but I leave with a newfound life and vocation beyond my wildest dreams. I love being a maid and to serve my betters. If it wasn't for my commitments, I would truly wish to stay in service with you. I then broke down and cried, the first time in front of the director or any of the staff. I was packed and ready to go. I was wearing one of my smart suits. I had my hair done, courtesy of Ladywood House. My shoulder-length hair was now honey blonde with highlights. I was wearing a delicate sapphire pendant with a gold chain given to me by Dr. Barrington. She said she chose a gemstone to match my eyes. I treasured it, but I would only wear it when dressed in civvies. It was not a maid's place to wear jewelry. I didn't know how long the journey would be, but if we stopped for a break, however much I wanted to wear one of my uniforms, it would not be advisable. I was taken to a motorway services area where I expected to find Diane waiting for me. Imagine my surprise when I saw Stella Brightman. I thought the police were not supposed to make contact with me after the court case. "Hello, Stella," I greeted her. "What a nice surprise." She glared at me. "Haven't you learned anything? You are not to speak unless spoken to." We drove most of the way in silence. As we turned into a leafy suburban residential street, Ms. Brightman then spoke. "When we arrive at your new place of work, I will take you to the maid's quarters where you will freshen up and change into the uniform laid out on the bed. You will remain in your room until your mistress asks me to bring you to her." We pulled up outside an Edwardian detached three-story house among a row of similar houses. These were the houses of middle-class Edwardians who would have retained a maid-of-all-work. My ingrained instinct to obey stopped me speculating until I had changed and was sitting in the armchair in what I presume was my sitting room. There was also a bedroom, bathroom and a sewing room in the cramped ground floor quarters next to the kitchen. I now started to panic. Has there been a mix-up? Was I expected to work as a maid to an employer I had never met? Was it a family? Was Diane still expecting me? Had the police and witness protection made an error? There was a knock on the door. I opened it and there stood Ms. Brightman. "The mistress will not see you until tomorrow. Go to bed now, rise early, and familiarize yourself with the kitchen. You will be required to assume your duties by preparing a breakfast of freshly baked croissants and coffee for two, to be served in the dining room at 9 a.m. I was dressed in the supplied stereotypical uniform of a dress, cap and apron, trimmed in lace. Not the modern uniform of a domestic helper or housekeeper, but neither the style or quality of my own uniforms. The cap had short ribbons and the apron was tied with a large bow, something I was familiar with. I wore my own lacy underwear, which was nice, and my own sheer black tights. There were no shoes, so I wore my own. Just modest 3-inch heels for daytime service. I had laid the table and everything was ready. It was 9 o'clock and I heard voices, so I knocked on the dining room door. I heard Ms. Brightman call enter and I brought in a basket of warm croissants. I had learned how to bake them in the Ladywood house kitchen and had been praised by cook. I quickly looked up and it was my Diane, but she was in conversation with Ms. Brightman. I averted my gaze, as I was expected to do, placed the croissants on the buffet table and anxiously stood back to one side with my hands together. After a while, Ms. Brightman called out without looking up, "Serve us with croissants and 2 white coffees." I did so and then transferred the jams, butter, sugar and cream from the buffet table to the main table. They weren't going to serve themselves, as was the tradition at breakfast. I offered them more croissants, they appeared to be going down well, and served fresh coffee. "You are dismissed. I will instruct you about your duties when Miss Havers and I have finished breakfast." I knew Diane would have a new identity, but I was expecting her to retain the title Mrs. She was not supposed to be available after all. The documents for my new identity had Mrs. Alice Gibbons and I assumed Diane would be Mrs. Diane Gibbons. This is not going as I had expected. I was getting worried. She had not acknowledged my presence, let alone had spoken to me. I only ever spoke to Ms. Brightman, never to Miss Havers. I would serve her at meal times, but otherwise I was instructed by Ms. Brightman not to speak to or be seen by Miss Havers. I did wonder, but was relieved that they had separate bedrooms and I found no evidence that they were sleeping together or were lovers. You cannot hide anything from a maid. I never left the house, all supplies were either delivered or brought in by Ms. Brightman. After a while I started to wear my own uniform. Nothing was said, but it gave me pleasure in contrast to my shattered dreams and now lonely life. I did make a special effort when preparing meals for Miss Havers, including her favorites, which was heartening to see her enjoy. Otherwise she ate very little and she seldom smiled. She rarely went out and seemed not to have any friends. After about a month nothing had changed. I accepted, and indeed, enjoyed my position of maid-of-all-work. The house was well equipped with aids and household appliances. It was what I had expected to be doing as a housewife, just without the dresses and the companionship. Then one day Ms. Brightman announced that she was going away for a few days. I was instructed to prepare and leave meals for Miss Havers at the normal times in the dining room, but not to enter while she was in the room. She would serve herself. It was 5 minutes before lunchtime and I was dishing up in the kitchen. I had prepared a spicy sweet potato soup, which I knew Miss Havers liked, along with freshly baked rolls. I had kept some back for myself. Then in walked Miss Havers. I froze. "Alice, I will have lunch in the kitchen today and will you please join me?" I nervously set the table and ladled a second bowl of soup and sat down. "You are such a beautiful woman. but I know you are my Derek. Despite the facial surgery and your new sultry voice, I love it. You must be devastated to find the situation you are in. You may speak freely to me, whatever that dreadful woman told you. I don't understand what has happened. Has there been a major error or misunderstanding, or have you changed your mind about our relationship? Let me explain. She took some soup. This is delicious, by the way. You have become an outstanding cook. Thank you. It was part of my training while I was in isolation. I have learned to cook for a household and for entertaining. I prefer to cook from scratch using fresh ingredients when possible. Pastries and desserts are my specialty. Wonderful. What else did you learn? I was trained for my designated position to be a maid of all work, to be a housekeeper for a small household. My skills include cleaning, cooking of course, laundry and sewing. I later specialized as a lady's maid. I have training in beauty therapy, hairdressing and makeup. I can help you bathe and dress and look after your wardrobe. A lady's maid is also expected to accompany her mistress when she goes out. I make my own uniforms. And of course I can still carry out all those DIY and maintenance jobs around the house as I did when we lived as husband and wife. And car maintenance, of course. Wow. I look forward to getting to know the new you. But you are so graceful and have lovely nails. I think we can get someone in to do the maintenance and jobs around the house. But it will be handy in an emergency. Although my designated training was as a maid and I wasn't sure you would be my employer, I focused on the skills to be a housewife as we originally planned. But I'm a maid now. You are more than my maid. I have been keeping this safe for you. She placed something in my open palm. My wedding ring. I put it on immediately. After you left, I was taken to a safe house and that woman came to stay with me. She said it was to help me get re-established. It was her job. Well, it turns out that Brightman is corrupt. She told me she knew the people who were out for vengeance, and unless I shared your income with her she would tell them where I lived. Things were also getting hot for her and she was going to resign from the police and disappear and decided to live with me. What better place to hide than a safe house? But why did you not even acknowledge me? Oh, I'm so sorry, darling. But Brightman threatened to tell the gang where to find you if I did. I don't know how you ended up as a maid, but I think it is wonderful. You are very good. You are a natural. It is who you are. But I do know Brightman liked the idea of being served and keeping you under control. I knew you weren't yourself. I'm so relieved. We are going to go into hiding before she gets back. But I don't know where. Do you have any ideas? For the last 2 years I was at a private maid school called Ladywood House. The director said I would be welcome back at any time. Perhaps she can help? Can you call her? I don't think I could. I'd rather you spoke to her. Her name is Dr. Barrington. Of course. Do you have her number? While she was in the study on the phone I finished my lunch and cleared up. And half-hour later she returned to the kitchen. I've spoken to Dr. Barrington. She is going to send a car for us tomorrow afternoon and we can stay in one of the guest suites. I also contacted DCI Hunter. He was very interested to know the whereabouts of Brightman. He got in touch with witness protection and they arranged removers for tomorrow morning. He said it was the least they could do. I don't know what I would do without you. Don't worry, I will look after you. Until death do us part. This afternoon we will pack things to take with us tomorrow. Brightman will come back to an empty house. I can pack. It is what I do. I am your lady's maid. Oh, Alice, you are more than that. By the way, I do like Alice. I'm glad you kept it, but I think you should be Havers and not Gibbings. As I was saying, we can pack together and we don't have much time because now we are going upstairs. It has been a long time and I want to explore your new body. That evening, we went out to a restaurant to celebrate our reunion. I wore one of my civilian dresses. When we got back I served her a nightcap wearing my spiciest uniform. When we went to bed my best lacy nightdress didn't stay on for long. We were having breakfast together, Diane insisted, when she asked. After you completed your maid training and transition, Why did you stay for a second year and not leave as planned? I didn't understand what she meant. Leave my mistress? I'm a domestic servant. I couldn't possibly leave until she no longer required my services and had made arrangements for a new master or mistress. You are truly a maid in mind and spirit. I am never going to let you go. There is something I need to tell you. For this past year I was Dr. Barrington's lady's maid. Do I need to be worried? Well, my duties did include helping her to dress and bathe and accompanying her. I carried out my duties diligently so I could serve you in the same capacity, my lady. You can forget the my lady. But is that all? Well, not just as your maid of all work come lady's maid, but if it pleases you also as your wife, companion and lover. I like the sound of that. Dr. Barrington gave me a sapphire pendant as a leaving present. She must be a very nice lady, and respected you despite you being her maid. I look forward to meeting her. We appear to have something in common. Dr. Barrington greeted us on our arrival. Welcome back, Alice, she grinned and then gasped. Oh, I am so pleased, you're wearing the pendant I gave you. Thank you, my lady. This is my wife, Miss Havers. Diane, said my wife. Hello, Diane. You have a wonderful husband, sorry, wife. She was the best personal maid I have known. You are a very lucky woman. If you want my advice, I would keep her as your personal maid. I intend to. And it is what I now want too, my lady. I then went red-faced. I had spoken without being spoken to. Alice, you can speak freely to me now. You are no longer a maid here, you are a guest and my friend. And you must call me Angela. I didn't say anything, I still felt uncomfortable speaking to my betters, even to Diane. We found a new home fairly quickly in a nearby town. Witness protection took over the house Diana had bought as they thought it would make an ideal safe house, but not after catching Brightman. The police had laid in wait for her return. They had enough evidence without our testimony and they didn't want to expose our new identities and whereabouts. Diane and I loved each other, we always had and always will, and are happily married. We couldn't return to our old lives, that was never the plan. I was now a woman, as intended. But I was now also a maid, that is how I thought and behaved and I could not envisage being anything else, so the plan to be a wife to Diane was no longer tenable for me, but of course as a good maid I would do anything my mistress wished. She accepted this, as long as I was happy and we were together. So I became her full-time, live-in personal maid and housekeeper. She enjoyed seeing me happy, being looked after and, yes, the role play. But to me it was real, not play. Of course, we were lovers. So although I had my own room for my uniforms and for show, I always slept with Diane. Otherwise we kept to the rules. Outside the bedroom, if Diane wanted to have a conversation she would initiate it and we would talk like the married couple we were. I would occasionally ask for permission to speak, or rather indicated, if I wanted to talk. Diane made all the decisions, usually after talking to me. Taking responsibility could cause me discomfort and stress. I liked having my mistress to decide what was best for me and tell me what to do. She usually asked me to accompany her when she went out. I was her spouse after all and she wanted to enjoy life together. I would dress like her and we go shopping, to restaurants, or to the theater, for example, and away on holiday. I did enjoy these excursions, to be a normal woman for a while in the company of my dearest. But of course she knew she still had to make the decisions, she would tell me what to do or order from the menu for me. Just how I wanted it. Her social life also involved entertaining. For business and for some of her friends and acquaintances not in the loop she would invite them to her home and I would prepare and serve as her maid and call her madam. It was well known she had a traditional maid. But for close friends I would be the hostess, her spouse, and I called her Diane. I loved the dresses she chose for me to wear, nearly as much as my uniforms. If she was invited she went alone, but for our close friends we would go together. I would feel uncomfortable being a guest, being helped with my coat or being served. But our friends, who knew me and were true hosts, would allow me to serve or clear the table and were truly grateful if I helped in the kitchen or washed up. Life couldn't be better for me. I could serve my betters and yet enjoy a full life with Diane. As I was doing all the chores, though I didn't consider them so as I enjoyed my work, Diane had little to do. She wanted to do something meaningful. So she set up a maid agency in partnership with Angela. They rented an office in the town center. The service was discreet. She only took on maids who had completed foundation training at Ladywood House. They were very popular. Clients liked domestic staff who could, for example, operate a dishwasher yet be quite capable of cleaning by hand the dirtiest of pots and pans. And maids who were traditional in their approach to their duties and employer. They were appreciated. Diane negotiated on their behalf and achieved above-market rates. Her open register listed maids who had fully transitioned to women, but there were also special registers listing maids who were crossdressers or feminized maids who had retained their manhood. Needless to say, any prospective employer was carefully vetted. Diane wanted her girls to be safe and happy. But she wanted me to be happy too. She knew I had developed a penchant for wearing feminine uniforms and she loved to see me wearing them. Although during the day I usually wore a more contemporary uniform in case there were callers, in the evening when she came home for dinner I wore one of my expanding collection of French maid outfits, proper ones of course, sexy but not erotic. I make them myself. I loved wearing 2 or 3 taffeta petticoats with lace hems that peeked out from under my black satin dress. And my lingerie was always frilly. I was a maid in heaven. My dearest Angela, we have become the best of friends, and although we meet regularly socially and to discuss agency business, I wanted to thank you in a traditional way. My life with Alice over the last year has been the best time of my life. I've been happy beyond my wildest dreams. The agency goes from strength to strength and I get great pleasure seeing our girls entering service in welcoming and appreciative households. But above all else it is living and being married to Alice and seeing her so happy and content that is the joy of my life. And I have you to thank. We now know it was a corrupt police officer that sent Derek to Ladywood House with the intention that he was to become a maid in a household controlled by her and living off his pension and my income. Although we were apart for a year longer, Derek becoming Alice and a maid in error was the best that could have happened to us. I can see clearly that being a maid suits her, more so than being a housewife. It is her vocation to be a maid, to be a servant. She likes serving especially those who she considers her betters, although she is far better than either you or me. She is caring, respectful and considerate. She doesn't like responsibility and making decisions. I always try to decide what she would really want, and she yearns to be guided and protected. She always expects me to choose what clothes to wear. I find it endearing, as if she was from a distant and more romantic era. You have mentioned that you were concerned when Alice told you she was expecting to become a housewife and not a maid, especially as you would never enroll someone against their will. But as you had a contract with witness protection, it was not possible for you to contact her sponsor, which was me, although I didn't know this. Well, your decision to continue with her foundation training turned out to be the right one, as we both know now. Then when you saw the dismay and puzzlement on her face when you told her, after staying for another year, she was to be a maid of all work to a mistress and her companion, you realized something was wrong and decided to take her under your wing as your personal maid during her year as a senior girl. Alice said that she thinks she failed you as you spent more time tutoring her than she did serving you. She didn't realize that you never have a personal maid. You knew that if she indeed was to be a housewife, then she should be seen by society as a woman and not just a maid. Your plan to take her with you when you were away from Ladywood House, as your personal assistant or companion, was genius. Alice is now a well-rounded and accomplished woman as well as a maid. You have asked me how I feel about having Alice as my maid and not a housewife. I never really answered that because I wasn't sure myself. I was expecting to continue our marriage as two equals, just as when she was my husband, and she still is legally, and not my wife. Alice is my maid and dresses as a maid because in her mind that is who she is and wants to be. She is also willing to dress and accompany me as my companion because she wants to please me, and it is a duty of a lady's maid, and I'm convinced she enjoys it nearly as much as being a maid. She looks pretty and feminine.